Good evening, and welcome on behalf of the Crossroads Cultural Center. Tonight's event will focus on the theme of marriage as addressed by Father Julián Carrón in his recent book, Disarming Beauty, Essays on Faith, Truth, and Freedom. In this book, Carrón offers a broad analysis of the pressing questions facing today's society, central among which is the issue of marriage and family life. We are fortunate tonight to have with us Dr. Joseph Atkinson, who will develop the theme addressed by Father Carrón, and Barry and Laura Stolman, a couple who have been married for 30 years, and who will offer a witness to show how the following provoking words by Father Carrón can be verified in real life. Quote, "The nature of the marriage vocation is walking together towards the only one who can answer the thirst for happiness that the other arouses constantly in me, Christ. In this way, it will be possible not to move from one husband to another like the Samaritan woman in the Gospel without finding satisfaction. The awareness that she was unable to solve her own drama by herself, despite changing husbands 5 times, made her perceive Jesus as a good so desirable that she could not help crying out, 'Sir, give me this water that I may no longer be thirsty.' Without an experience of Christ as human fulfillment, the Christian ideal of marriage is reduced to something impossible to realize. The indissolubility of marriage and the eternity of love seem to be dreams beyond reach. In fact, they are the fruit of such an intense experience of Christ that they appear to the couple themselves as a surprise, as the witness that nothing is impossible for God. Only an experience of fullness of life like this can show the rationality of the Christian faith as totally corresponding to man's desire and needs, even in marriage and family." Dr. Joseph Atkinson currently serves as Associate Professor of Sacred Scripture at the John Paul II Institute in Washington, D.C., and is the creator and founder of the Biblical Vision of Family series. Recognized as a leading expert in the topic of the family as the domestic church, Dr. Atkinson has been developing this material for more than 15 years and has spoken in various parts of the world. The author of numerous articles, Dr. Joseph Atkinson's forthcoming book, The Biblical and Theological Foundations of the Family, is being published by Catholic University of America Press. He is also a senior fellow of the St. Paul Center for Biblical Theology and serves on the advisory board of Catholic Scripture Study International. Dr. Atkinson has been married for more than 30 years. He and his wife, Nancy, have 6 children. Barry and Laura Stolman have been married for 30 years. They have
26.
26 years. Soon to be 30. They have 8 children and
50.
They have 8 children and 2 grandchildren and are members of the Catholic lay movement, Communion and Liberation. Barry has a bachelor's degree in philosophy from the Catholic University of America, and Laura has a degree in political science from the Catholic University of Milan. Barry owns Stolman Kilner Construction and Renovation Company and is a cabinet maker and a master craftsman. Laura works in admissions at the Avalon School in Maryland and also runs a summer English program for international students called Amerigo DC. They both love farming, and they are known for organizing an annual pig roast for 400 people at the end of every summer.
Let me get my timer going here, because I have a tendency to run on, as I think my family would well acknowledge. Okay, here we go. Okay, here we go. Great. Sorry for being late, but it's a great way to make everybody anticipate me, so I hope that's good. When my wife and I were married, we weren't Catholic at that point, but we certainly were both Christians. And we knew Christ enough to know that marriage was truly indissoluble. Once you enter into it, it's a covenant. And so we knew that divorce was just simply not a possibility for those who were following Jesus. However, he didn't say that murder wasn't a possibility. And there have been times, I'm sure, when my wife would, and certainly with justifiable reasons, have done me in, but she's been very gracious to me over the years. I'm sure the same can be said for my children. What I want to do tonight is I want to, if I can find my paper, I want to just kind of go over what Father Carrón was talking about, and to put it in also a theological context as well. And what I want to entitle my presentation tonight is Earthen Vessels. That's really the title, Earthen Vessels, or the vocation to infinite love in a finite world. And that's where our attention is. We have these longings for infinite love, but we live in a finite world. We're finite. What does that mean? Our whole being is contingent. How can they ever be resolved? So that's the dramatic tension. The greatest task set before every human being, in fact, that which defines our very humanity, is the task of resolving our desire for intimacy, our need for love. There's an existential loneliness within every person. How do we resolve that? As we mature, each person has to face this mystery. It's often the dark nights of being a teenager is really, that's what it's about. And then as we continue in adulthood. And we have to resolve it in one way or another, and there's different ways of resolving it. But the reality is that there is no escaping this encounter with this question. Father Carrón's text that we're reflecting on tonight goes to the heart of this existential question we all face, and he does it by examining the call to bodily love. And I use that term for the moment rather than marriage. Virtually all societies, in fact probably all, place man in the center of some form of a religious matrix. Whether we reflected the divinities in some way, or we interacted with this divine realm in the different societies, there was always admitted at some intuitive level a transcendent dimension to the human experience. In other words, there's something more than what we just experience on earth. There's something more that we're called to than just our bodies, even in loving this person. There's a framework in which we're working this out. Sexuality, the understanding of the binary nature of man, and the bond between man and woman were intrinsically caught up in the divine realm. If you know much about history, you have pagan cults and you have orgies and things like that. But in fact, religious orgies, they're not in fact some form of dissipation or lechery, but in fact there is a grasping of the divine nature of our sexuality. The dynamism of sexuality had both a temporal and a cosmological significance, and hence that's why you have religious ceremonies that have surrounded virtually all marriages in all societies. As an aside, I will only note that while the intuition in these societies was essentially correct, unfortunately sexuality itself was divinized in various ways, and its true connection with the divine was misappropriated. This can only be resolved in the coming of the divine bridegroom, which we see is prophesied in Hosea. Father Carrón begins his presentation with an astute observation. The whole understanding of marriage, which has been the bedrock of civilizations for millennia at this point, has suddenly, in our day, our time, evaporated. It's been challenged and replaced, at least societally, with proposals that are based on a radically different anthropology and understanding of the human person, and which rejects, in the end, any sense of transcendence. It really is a materialistic anthropology. There is only the human experience and experiment that's going on. It's only in this world, and only there is love, but it's my love which I can determine the parameters of. The heady success of this secular counter-proposal has been significant in our day, as Carrón points out. The question is, does it really deliver the fulfillment that it promises? And given the rates of divorce, given the multiple relationships like the Samaritan woman, given the banality now of sexuality, given the hurt and the woundedness, I would proffer that there's something wrong and that it does not deliver. To properly understand what is going on, Carrón begins with the primordial, the fundamental question that lies at the heart of every person. He quotes Benedict XVI, who says that man's ancient and ever new question about himself is, who am I? And what is man? So it has both a personal dimension, but it also has a much larger context, mankind as a whole, a cosmological question. And they both pierce each other. If, as virtually all people of great diverse societies have held, man is indeed participating in a cosmic drama, a drama whose central action is man himself as he tries to discover, or in fact rediscover, in the sense of agnonesis, who he is, and the source from whom he has come, and a drama whose end is the complete and final fulfillment of those desires, not of our own making, which have been inscribed in our hearts. And if we refuse to acknowledge this, i.e. the otherworldly dimension of our existence, then, as Carrón says, this very lack of awareness, being bound to the temporal dimension only, will lead us inevitably to build our relationships on deception and illusion. And that's true, regardless whether we're religious or not. The greatest danger is that the man or woman in love will inevitably look to the beloved to be and to do that which the beloved is not capable of. Love is always infinite. That is why it is forever, for always. And it is transcendent. But the beloved, no matter how much he or she is loved, is always frail and finite, limited by death and a fallen nature. The beloved, without the infinite horizon of God's love, without being inserted in that horizon, will be at some point in that relationship, no matter who we are, be transformed from a subject to an object. The truth of human experience, no matter how noble, how great, how ecstatic it feels, is that it ultimately cannot fulfill the longings of the human heart that have been put in it by God himself. Quote, love promises infinity and eternity, a reality far greater and total other than our everyday existence. These longings are right, they're correct, they're at the center of who we are. But how are we to interpret them? How then are we to understand love and the object of our love, which promises so much, yet in our experience it cannot deliver? The capacity to answer the call of this infinite love within the temporal realm is that we have to know ourselves, our true selves, and our true state, that we are created. In Gaudium et Spes, verse 20, or section 22, it states this: the truth is that only in the mystery of the incarnate Word, that is Jesus, does the mystery of man take on light. We can only fully understand ourselves through the lens of Jesus. For Adam, the first man, was a figure of him who was to come, namely Christ the Lord. Christ is the one in whom we are created. Adam, in fact, did not exist first, but Jesus, the Son of Man, does. Christ, the final Adam, by the revelation of the mystery of the Father and his love, in particular the love that he has for the Son, fully reveals to man himself, and makes his supreme calling clear. That's the heart of this mystery. If we don't know Christ, we are bumbling along. We have intimations, and we move in a direction, but we can't get a final grasp of where we are. The mystery is first that all things are created in Christ. If you remember John's Gospel, the prologue, it says, di auto, through him, through Christ, and without him, was not anything made that was made. In other words, everything, including our human bodies, our masculinity and femininity, all things were created through him, for him, and depend on him. This is a most difficult concept to accept or even to understand in our modern world because it challenges our deeply valued autonomy. But in fact, that we are created and that we are contingent is at the basis of the gospel. Unless we grasp that again, the essence of our created nature, the gospel does not make any sense. Man and woman, masculinity and femininity, our bipolarity, is really and always icons of a greater reality. But remember, they're participatory icons, not just icons we hang up on the wall, or symbols. It's not a symbol or a sign that we just see. But our masculinity and femininity is participating already in Jesus himself. Whether you're a Buddhist or a Hindu, it doesn't matter, or a Catholic or a Christian or a Protestant, it doesn't matter. Every person is already, their very masculinity and femininity, is participating in Christ. The great revelation to those of us who are Catholic is that we see it more clearly and therefore can follow it. And when we are baptized, something powerful happens. If we lose sight of this iconic value of our sexuality, if the memory of this is dulled or lost, and here I'm referring to anamnesis, then we will not be able to, quote, encounter what the sign, our bodies, our masculinity, our femininity point to. And we will reduce the person who appears to us to only what appears before our eyes. In other words, it's just simply a horizontal dimension. The vertical is lost, which eventually will always be less than perfect and less than infinite. The great mystery, mysterion, and I use the word advisedly, is that, quote, if we do not love Christ, who is beauty made flesh, more than the person you love, your covenantal partner, the latter relationship withers, because Christ is the truth of this relationship. Those who are not in Christ, but intuitively know this, know the divine dimension of their love, and yet in some way is a gateway, an openness, a participation in that divine realm. Even without knowing it, they're moving towards Christ. That's why love, marital love, is perhaps one of the greatest signs we have for evangelization, because it shows us who Jesus is. Those of you who know Pride and Prejudice well, and I'm sure that virtually every woman here does know that. In the story, there's the story, of course, the loves between Elizabeth and Darcy and Jane and Bingley, but look at the ones that are most passionate. Wickham and Lydia, they are completely head over heels. They are totally sensuous. They're totally given to their moment, their temporal passion that they feel for one another, which they see as love itself. What happens in the story, if you know the story, is that at the end, his passion for her just dies out, and he just keeps involved in gambling and so on, and dissipation with drink. Hers, says Austen, lasts a little longer, but then it eventually is extinguished. But she holds on to her rights as the married woman she is. That's what it dissolves into. So passion without a larger structure which goes beyond the person, which has some tie with the infinite dimension of God, will eventually burn itself out. I remember one person who wrote to me on the eve of her wedding night, and she said she loved her husband to be deeply, but she knew in her heart that she had to love Jesus more. That's hard for most of us really to imagine on the eve of our wedding, because our focus is so much on the beloved, and rightly so. But the truth is that human love is, in the end, a pathway towards the infinite love of Jesus. And if we get those reversed, we will not be able to fulfill that longing in our hearts, ultimately. That's why Jesus says, unless you hate mother, brother, sister, and so on, and even yourself, you cannot follow me. Not that we shouldn't have relationships. Obviously, Christ calls us to them. But the truth is that Christ is the foundation of all relationships. And if we ever make an idol of anyone or anything, it will in the end pervert what love really is. In seeking for love only on the temporal dimension, we end up destroying it. If we look at the great Ephesians text, Ephesians 5:32, we see that Paul is talking in Ephesians, this a very profound text on what is salvation, who is Christ, and so on. And he does that for 5 long chapters. And this is most profound, most analytical, and most integrated epistle that he writes. And then suddenly, in writing about the salvation of Jesus Christ, he then in chapter 5 begins to apply it in a very concrete way. He says in 5:22 that all of us are to be submitted to each other as unto Christ. In other words, we treat each other as Christ. Men, women, children, everybody, emperors, slaves, it doesn't matter who you are. We are to be submitted to each other as Jesus submitted himself, so that we could be free and we could come back to God the Father. And then talks about husbands, and then he talks about wives, and then he concludes by saying, this is a great mystery. And he talks about, quoting Genesis, that the two shall become one flesh. In other words, there's going to be a union, a communion between the two, which is bodily, which is psychological, which is fleshly, which is spiritual. And it's so profound that these two who are separate entities now become one. It is a reflection, a mirror of the incredible integrated unity between Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. It's a reflection of it, a participation in it. So much so that Paul says, the two shall become one flesh, and then in a moment of inspiration, as if the clouds or the sky opens for a moment, he says that this is a great mystery of a man and woman, but what I'm really talking about is the mysterion, the mystery of Christ's love for the church. Now that is not self-evident. And it takes a long time before you can actually understand how does the fleshly union of man and woman, the psychological union of man and woman, which has its unique and special expression in the nuptial bond and the sexual reality, what relationship does that have to do with Christ dying on the cross for his beloved church, his bride, the church? But that's true. The first primary relationship is Christ's love for the church. And the manifestation of that in the world is a marriage in which two people baptized in Christ, in other words, in whom Christ is living, now form a single bond, a single one flesh unity with the very power and life of Jesus Christ within them. That is why Jesus says in Matthew 19 that it was not so in the beginning, where people like the Samaritan woman would shop around for husbands or get rid of them or wives, or that you could do whatever you wanted in terms of relationships. But the relationship between man and woman was sacrosanct, was indeed a covenantal relationship, participating in the very action of Jesus giving his life for his beloved church, his bride, the church. There is no power that can destroy that. There is no obstacle that can come into a marriage that can destroy it once the hardness of heart has been removed. That's why my wife and I knew that when we got married. Yes, we could get frustrated, and yes, we would be tempted to do the other end. But we knew that there was always the power, no matter how cold we were to each other, no matter how either of us have fallen, that grace overcomes all things if we are open to his working in us, which can be very painful at times, but it leads to health. We are earthen vessels. That's the point of my talk. Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, "For God who said, 'Let light shine out of darkness,' Genesis 1, this God has shone into our hearts to bring to light." In other words, it's already there in every human person if we just open ourselves to it. The light of the knowledge of the glory of God
on the face of Jesus Christ. That's why I talked about memory. In us, in every human being, there is the vestigia, the traces of Jesus Christ. That's why when you can go into a forest in Africa or the Amazon and proclaim Jesus Christ, and people will say yes. Not because it's something from the outside coming in, but because it's response to a memory within the human race of where we come from, our source, and God and Father. This knowledge is within us, and then Paul goes on and says, but we hold this treasure, the knowledge of God, the love of God, that we are created by Him and that He loves us as a Father, and He has redeemed us in His Son. We hold this treasure in earthen vessels. We're not perfect. We fall. We hurt each other. We will continue to do until the beatific vision. But we still continue to hold it. Why? So that the surpassing power of God's grace may be of God and not from us. If we think that we are going to be able to live out a marriage fully and to finally be able to fulfill that infinite longing that God has inscribed into our nature, we will be disillusioned. It is a delusion. We cannot do that on our own. Rather, says Paul as he finishes there, we are always carrying in the body, our marriages, our relationships, the death of Jesus. I always found that odd because you would think, no, it's the resurrection. And there's many groups of Christians who always emphasize the resurrection, the resurrection, the resurrection. They don't celebrate Good Friday, but they will celebrate Easter. But they don't understand that you can't get to Easter unless first of all you go through Good Friday. Why do we carry the death of Jesus, says Paul? The reason is so that the life of Jesus may be manifest in our bodies. The one body of man and woman in the bond of matrimony, the one flesh union, is meant to manifest both the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. What is the relationship between man and woman? I'll conclude. Well, this relationship between man and woman is the way, certainly one of the primary ways, of resolving the existential loneliness that is at the heart of every person. It is the way that we try to resolve so that the need to come to terms that we are meant for another. We are created already longing for the other, no matter who we are. And yet we find it impossible to quench that desire, ultimately, even in the beloved. It therefore means something more, this man-woman relationship. The union of one flesh, union of man and woman, is a sign, a symbol, an icon, but a participatory one, of a much greater reality. But it is what God has given us in the created order, marriage between man and woman, which really and truly participates in the mystery of the cross. It is going to be through the spouse, the one you are called to be one flesh with, and that grows in time, that eventually, if you are faithful to it, through the times of resurrection and joy, through the miracles of Cana, through the raising of the dead, through the healing of the sick, but also through the moments of the temptations in the desert, and through the walking through the dusty roads, through the abandonment, yes, the abandonment of the disciples, and the abandonment of love in our relationships. Even that never quenches the bond that Christ has established. He is faithful unto death. We are called to the same reality, and that is the sign of Jesus Christ in the world. Then we will come to know, to the degree that we are faithful, who we truly are, who the other is, and that we actually taste the first fruits of Jesus' resurrection, as Paul says, and we begin to participate in Christ's eternal, infinite love for us and for the world. We are called to the way of the cross. which will lead to the resurrection. There is great joy, but there's also difficulties and great sorrow. It's all woven into one. Only God knows the pattern of your life, of your spouse's life, and what you are called to, what I am called to. Whatever it takes to bring us to heaven, that is what God will bring us through. Our need is to be faithful, even in difficult and seemingly impossible times. I'll end with one little very quick story. It's kind of a rabbinical story, only it's a Christian one. God sent this cross to this man, and the cross, unfortunately, was 17 feet long. And so he had to carry it, but it was so long that it just wasn't the right size. So he said, Lord, would you really just cut off a little bit at the end? So God did. And then he kept on going through his life, and it just didn't fit because it was so long. So he said, would you keep on doing? So he did this year after year, decade after decade, saying, look, we just make it fit my shoulder a little bit better because it really hurts. So he goes on for many, many years doing that, and a little bit chipped off. And finally, he dies, and he gets to the point where he's to enter into heaven. But the problem is that there's this great big abyss. It's a bottomless abyss. There's no end to it. And so he's on the edge, and he's at the gates of heaven, and Peter's there, and the man calls over and he says, how am I supposed to get over here? And Peter says, well, you put your cross over it and walk across. The problem is, his cross was now too short. You don't know, through the difficulties and the sorrows or the problems that you have, if indeed they are, in fact, as difficult as they may be, the grace of God to bring us into his infinite love. Thank you.
So, Laura and I were talking about how to, two of us present one story. Of course, we can't both speak for half an hour, but I'm going to tell a story, and she'll interject and correct and shut me up when appropriate. But we'll attempt. I think I just want to remind there's a couple of points in that chapter. Who am I? What is man? And the understanding of that, the awareness of that, is at the basis and the foundation of a marriage. A marriage is between a man and a woman who live this drama. Secondly, the experience of the other as a sign, not as the ultimate objective, but as a sign of that promise, which is lived mysteriously in the marriage. Next, the idea of a possession with a certain detachment. Very, very sometimes counterintuitive maybe, but experience over time shows that this is absolutely the only way to truly love. And finally, that the drama of a marriage can only be lived within the context of a larger community, whatever that community may be, that by ourselves it would not be possible. So I want to tell a story that I think, at least for me, and I'll leave it to you to discover or to notice, for me certainly exemplifies and has taught me over the years and continues to teach me. I'm talking about a story that continues to be lived. Laura and I met 30 years ago, more or less, in college. She was an exchange student, going to school, met this girl, complete chance encounter, fantastic girl. First time I'd ever met anybody who I thought, there's somebody I might think about spending my life with. The only problem was she was Italian. Now, if you think, well, many of you don't remember, but for me in 87, I come from a large family. Nobody had a passport. I'd never been anywhere. I never wanted to go anywhere. I was very happy to live where I was, and the fact that she was Italian was a seemingly unsurmountable obstacle. And it meant, this was a great girl, except she's Italian, so, oh well, that's not going to work. 6 months, 9 months go by, she heads back to Italy, and we say goodbye. It was right around Christmas time, December 1987. She's leaving. And we say our goodbyes, and yet there was something in the goodbye that we both said, something doesn't quite make sense. This can't be. Yet it was. And we both spent a lot of energy to convince ourselves to that in fact this was a story that ended with this goodbye. We weren't ready to accept what was happening, except that it wasn't the end. She continued to communicate with me, I a little bit with her. There was no email. There was very little possibility to talk on the phone. These were letters on onion skin paper, so that the paper was lightweight and cost less to send. And I would open these letters and read the news of about 2.5 weeks ago, because that's the time it took for the letters to come. So, sound like I'm 150 years old, but I'm not. Some of you in the room know what I mean. So this communication went on until I had the opportunity to travel to visit. I had to get a passport. I went to Italy. I didn't hardly know where Italy was, and that's not a joke. I really didn't know anything about Europe, and nor did I have much interest. But I did have an interest in this girl. So I went to Italy, and she organized it in such a way we had there was a vacation, bunch of friends, etc., etc. Not being a world traveler, I literally, on the way back, went to the airport, missed the plane. Plane left the day before. I got the date wrong, whatever. It was an innocent mistake. It was not intentional at all. I can say it was very much a mistake. But I find myself in the airport, and the folks in the airport say, well, the plane left yesterday, and we're not sure what you're going to do. This is Italy, it's August, there's not much opportunity to do anything about it. Again, there's no internet, so tomorrow you can call the airline and find out what to do. So Sunday afternoon, we go back to her apartment in Milan, and this sounds crazy. Both of us at that point basically looked at each other and recognized, well, we can no longer continue to deny, right? A fact. There was a fact, a very clear fact, was that we were put together. I sure was no traveler. She, wasn't either. It was very clear at that point that we were together, and this thing, there was something going on here. We decided to get, basically at that point, we recognized that we were going to get married. But we hadn't dated or anything, so then that was a bit of a interesting challenge. And 2 days later, I flew back to America. So then we spent 2 years, again, communicating by letter, etc. And I think we saw each other twice in those 2 years, until we got to a point where we realized that if we were ever going to get married, we had to at least be on the same continent. So things worked out that it made sense for me to go to Italy. So I moved to Italy, I think I was 20 or 21. I moved to Italy. This could take all night, so I'll try to keep it short. Moved to Italy, spent 1.5 years there. We were married, 1.5 years after I got there. Mom, you wanted to say something about the preparation, the time that we lived in Italy before getting married.
So I take him to the class that it takes 6 months for the preparation. Marriage prep. And here there is a priest who talks about high theology. We are two, but we become one. So he speaks English. I'm very have a hard time to understand these things. So it was pathetic. But 6 months with at least I would say 150 people, couples. And for 6 months we all get together, and this tells you how a great companionship of friends walking together to get married. But during the 6 months, half of them didn't show up because they
didn't end up getting married.
didn't end up any. No, but actually, I think also they didn't show up. Yeah, they decided, no, this is not the right path for us. Or some others went to convents. Some became priests. Some found another girlfriend or whatever. So it was so beautifully well done and intense, and the companionship among us was so beautiful that we really verified this was our vocation.
I didn't understand a word of Italian, so it didn't matter to me what they were talking about, but it was an opportunity to spend an evening with her. Anyway, we made it through that, and a year and a half later we were married in Italy, in her little village. We got married. As I said, I come from a large family of folks who were not travelers. My parents, in fact, didn't come to the wedding. Her parents, although they lived in the same village, were also very perplexed, if you will. But what was so clear to both of us was that this thing that was happening to us was absolutely not our doing. I would never have gone to do what I did. This was not our doing. This was something that was happening to us, that was given to us, that we could not but accept. In fact, we spent a long time trying to reject, trying to convince ourselves that it wasn't the case. But circumstance and lots of friends and lots of time showed us that this absolutely was, again, not something we created and something we had to accept. We got married, 91. Children started to arrive. I was working in Italy as a cabinet maker. Things weren't easy. Italy's a fantastic place to live, was a fantastic place to live, and a very difficult place to try to raise a family. I think also because of the expectations and the ideas that both she and I had of what it meant to raise a family, we wanted her to be able to stay home. We had 3 children. We had moved a few times. We actually had basically followed work opportunities and friendships, opportunities to live and to share our lives with friends that brought us to different places. We were in Italy, I think, 7 years married. And it happened at one point that we came back to visit, what was it, Mom? We came back to visit my father who was sick. Very much, again, my father was sick with cancer, and it made sense to come home and visit. And I think we had 2 kids at the time. No, we had 3. Came back to visit. And then there, I discovered that there were significant work opportunities here in America. Things, as I said, were not so easy in Italy. Many things were great, many things were difficult. And we found ourselves again needing to make some big decisions. We immediately went home and to Italy and identified 3 very close friends of ours, one priest and 2 others who weren't married, both consecrated, but none of them were married folks, but 3 people who we really understood could help us to, face this big momentous step in our lives. Anyway, obviously the upshot of that was that 6 months later we found ourselves packing up and emigrating from Italy, immigrating to the U.S., and here we were. She was, I think, 6 months pregnant with the 4th child. And we found ourselves back in the U.S. And I had actually lined up a job and began working. And that began what was, I may have gone through as a youngster some challenges in moving to a new place before I got married. But my wife, for her coming back as a mother with 3 small children, pregnant with another one, and coming to a strange place, that was a big challenge and a tough time for her.
Yes, I hear it. At that time, Lancellotti, Carlo, where are you? Do you remember the beginning? So I moved to Washington, D.C., and for me it was a nightmare. And even, just to tell you, Catholic family, Catholic woman, I was not in favor of life in that moment. It happens in life. because you are facing a drama. No, you are not open to life, and it's not a scandal within our church, Catholic Church, and within our friendship. I learned that even that God wanted me to accept and to give it to Him. You know, I know if you cannot say yes to me, give me yourself anyway. And so for there is a big gap, big gap.
2 years.
2 years, 3 years between 3 years between Cecilia and Paolo, because for me it was so dramatic I couldn't say yes to life. What I want to say, but I remember Carlo. I remember that I used to have friends calling me at noon, say, "Okay, what did you see today?" I said that Barry has a job, and you know we have enough money. We can go out for pizza now. For me, it was so. This just to say that these are my friends taught me to see signs. You know, God hasn't abandoned you. You're not left here and you made a mistake. By the way, you made a mistake, we go back. I mean, what's the problem? But they taught me to constantly look at signs, to constantly look at the evidences, at the facts that God was taking care of me. I had enough money, for example, okay? That's what I do.
So where are we? We had come back to America, and shortly after coming back to the States, business, right, Mom? The next step was that I was able to start a business. I had, as I think I said, I spent my time in Italy working as a cabinet maker, making custom cabinetry, built-ins for commercial and residential. And so this being the United States, 6 months after I got back, I found myself in business for myself, which brought along with it challenges, excitement. Certainly it was very stimulating professionally and satisfying. A lot of pleasure, a lot of enjoyment, a lot of satisfaction, a lot of challenges. That was 98, I think, that was 1998, just to kind of give you a timeline. And then that continued, that grew, children continued to come along until at one point in, 2004. In 2004, I had a cabinet shop, had a big cabinet shop, a lot of equipment, warehouse and everything. And one morning in December, it's actually 13 years this coming Sunday, there was a fire and the building basically exploded, and I lost the entire business in a matter of a couple hours. And my family and also Luigi Tanzi's family were both fully implicated in both of us supported our families with this business, and this devastating fire basically put us out of business for close to a year, 10 months I think it was. So again, a tough period, a tough time. Had to make some decisions. We decided to rebuild and continue. And much of that period was we were helped by both friends in Italy, friends here. We were helped economically. We were helped, with also the very practical questions of, how to rebuild. Our families were helped. It was really one of those moments where it's very clear in life that, you are not alone, that you're accompanied, and that around you there is many other people and many other friends that make it possible to face the challenges of life. We'd seen that all along the way, and this was just another example. So we rebuilt the business just in time for the financial crisis in 2007, 8, 9. So in 2008, we basically the business collapsed. This time not for a fire, but for financial reasons. So at that point, we had, we have 8 kids by then? In 2008, yeah, we had 8 children. Our youngest daughter was born in 2007. And here we were with no business. Again, as if it wasn't already obvious enough that this was, A, not something we were building, but also not something that, at least from certain perspectives, was not something that was too successful either. another big challenge. This, of course, was, I guess, in many ways, a particularly difficult time for me, because, again, I found myself in a position where I wasn't able to support my children and my family, my wife, and that, personally, with my own, efforts, I wasn't able to financially support my family, and, again, helped my friends to do so. That quickly changed. That in 2009, I met a fellow who was a remodeler, building homes, remodeling homes, and we actually started working together right around March 19th, St. Joseph's Day, who's the patron saint of fathers and carpenters, and also my middle name. And so in 2009, we began again. So that's what, 8 years ago? What else, Mom? Along the way, I should back up a little bit. When we came back to America, we were able to buy a home with the, not just the help of, but, because Laura's parents basically helped us to buy a home. And we had a big home that was full of kids. And one of the things that we started to do very early on in our life here in America was to host students. We would always have extra kids around the house, 1 or 2 or more kids who would spend a year, a month, 6 months. And so a big part of our experience here in the last 20 years in the U.S. has been having students, having other people living with us and part of our family. And that has always been something very sort of intentional, not just by chance, not just, certainly not for economic reasons, but very intentional because it has been clear to us that we needed to live our family as something open and not something that closed in on itself. And that was one of the ways that we were constantly sort of provoked and challenged by inviting outsiders into our home, but into our home in a real way. They lived with us. They spent, like I said, a year or more with us. So anyway, because we had this nice big home that my in-laws, Laura's parents, had allowed us to purchase, this was possible. And life was at that point then, 2009, we started with this new business. 2000, well, I guess it's this year, 17, is that right, Mom? Did I skip anything that I should mention in between there? In 2000, so in the last year, basically, the business has struggled again. So we then have, 6 months ago, more or less, we basically sold our home in large part to pay business debts, and we now rent a home. We live in the country, a beautiful place out in the farmland. And again, what that's about, as this is not a story about my business travails, challenges, and such. Because everything that I'm talking about, every step of the way, has been something that we live together and something that has been faced step by step with friends. As I mentioned, when there was the time to decide to come to America, we picked 2 or 3 friends to help us with that. When the business burned down, there were a few very key people helping us. More recently, with the challenges of the business again and the step to have to sell our home, we've been helped again. Things as simple as go out to dinner with us on occasion. Take us out to dinner with us. But what's the significance of that? These are experiences where it's made perfectly clear to us that all of these things that happen, we are accompanied. We are not alone, that we, things that are clearly would be impossible, well, at least it's clear to me, it would be impossible for me to face these things on my own. We're never left alone. And challenges that we've faced all along the way have challenges, you know, like the business, but also, you know, the challenge of the home. And now having to sell our home has been also a big sort of provocation, maybe that's not the right word, challenge, in our marriage as well. What does that mean? I don't know, Mom, maybe you want to say something?
Yes, financial issues in a marriage are really hard. So if you have young people, if you have your parents facing financial struggles, you really have to understand them. It's not easy for the couple and, you know, for them in front of you guys, children. Through a dinner that a friend offers, through a phone call, through money. So Christ entered